During the summer, between my freshman and sophomore years of high school, I have the opportunity to participate in a really incredible summer program. It was about a month long and will give us art PE and science credit in return for jaunting all over the American West to camp, bike, hikes volants, whitewater raft, and conduct field experiments in geology and biology. Draw wildlife, make pottery out of raw clay we gathered ourselves, and you get the picture. It was a blast. I remember most of it were great fondness. There were a couple of experiences, though, that still give me a chill when I think about them. And this is one of the worst. It was one bright morning in June when me and my group, 3 teachers and about 20 students, turned up at the lip of a short vertical well that marked the entrance to the Nutty Buddy Cave. Nutty Buddy Cave was discovered in the 1960s, is located just west and north of central Utah. It is a hydrothermal feature located in a very fossil-furse area, home to cherty limestone, dolomite, desert limestone, and all sorts of other exciting things. Despite this, the foundations in the cave are not calcite, stalactites, or stalagmites that some people would expect. Instead, it's just sort of muddy and damp and brown, and the natural formations of silicon dioxide go mostly unnoticed by any of the real geology enthusiasts. Getting into the cave itself was already a test of my nerves. First, you had to clamber down, the short vertical drop, and then crawl through. Looks like a rabbit hole at the bottom. It quickly became clear that it was a little wider than it seems, but there was no way to move forward besides sliding in Dongir's stomach across the rocky detritus of the cave floor at about 6 to 10 feet. Once you managed that, the cave opened up into something much more spacious. Now, I have never been super excited about tight, enclosed spaces, but I don't think that was my discomfort at the time, was any more than a lot of people have. As it was, I had to really give myself a pep talk to get past the first crawl, but I managed to persuade myself to do it. There are a few different routes which could be taken one inside, but my group pretty much all wanted to head down to the bottom. That reaches the birth canal feature. This was a tight, a certainly small, corkscrew tunnel of rock, and I has no idea how they went to shove themselves through it like human toothpaste in a tube. I had no intentions of doing so, and there were a couple, others who agree with me. The crowd who wanted to have the skeletons compressed and stop by the birth canal, and the handful remaining continued on towards the feature at the lowest reach of the arm of the cave. This was another loop of rock, but much wider and oriented vertically. You drop or climb down one side, move to the bottom of the curve of the loop, and then climb her up to the other side. I was last in line of our intrepid splonkers, and so I was the last into the loo. It wasn't an impressively large feature, and the drop down into it was innocuous enough. The problem came, however, when I tried to get back up into the other side. I'm not a tall dude, in fact, I'm really short, 5 feet tall. And despite being a pretty physically fit 14-year-old, arm strength wasn't my strong suit. I could brace getting any leverage to push up or jump with my legs, thanks to the combination of distance I had to span and the ankle. The only option was to pull myself up in my arms, and it became dreadfully apparent to me right away that I was not able to do this. If I had been fully rested and not suddenly suffused to joint melting levels of mortal tear, I might have been able to manage a little bit to do it. But I always already fatigued them an hour or so of clawing around and descending into the cave. For the first time in my young life, I became truly aware of my own mortality. As the moments passed, I literally could not pull myself up. I suddenly understood how people can just end up dead, and dead in the worst possible ways. I had never been before, in a situation where I had no way out, and I was utterly dependent upon the ability of another person to fish me out of the jaws of a really miserable death. I know this sounds dramatic and hyperbolic, but to stay with me, I promise you it's not, Alex. I said, my voice coming out as a dusty, terrified squeaks. Alex, I can't get up. Luckily, my friend, who had been next to me last in line, was still within earshot. He was about a foot taller than I was, and probably about 30% scrawnier. He came back to the ledge and dropped down and reached for me, and luckily we managed between the two of us to scramble me up and out of the loop. I was pretty spooked, but had to stick with my class. So we were in the cave for at least another hour or so. When we finally ascended to the main gallery and merged into the blazing desert sun, I tell you, I've never been so more grateful to see this guy in my entire life. Over the years, Nutty Putty caves have turned up in the news from time to time. Stories are groups of careless hobby cavers and Boy Scouts who end up needing to be rescued from the area of the cave, or something of the sorts. And every time there has been some talk of measures to make it safer or regulate who is allowed to enter. The last time, though, the talk was all too late. A man who was caving with his brother and some others were exploring the cave and accidentally crawled along a tiny passage and then into a vertical crevice, only to find himself compressed on all sides, suspended upside down, and unable to move anywhere. 28 hours of rescue attempts later, with rescue was able to get close enough to see him, but unable to actually unstick him, he died. They couldn't even recover his body. Nutty Putty is sealed now, a torturous crypt for unfortunate person who made a small error in the movement. In judgment, had I been alone, it could have easily been me. And this thought still haunts my nightmares. It all started back in the summer of 2008. I was about 13 or 14 at the time. My friend and his family had invited me to go camping with him up in Northern California, almost at the border of Oregon. We had lots of stuff planned, and one of those things was to go to some caves. When we got to the caves, my friend's mom told us to take a sweater and a flashlight because it was very cold and dark in there. Me and my friend came to the entrance of the cave, and his parents and sisters followed. When we were walking through the cave, there was a bunch of these little cul-de-sacs to our left and right. Me and my friend went into one, and it was called Lucifer's Corner. We stayed in there for about 5 minutes, just looking around, and realized that we were alone, so we turned off our flashlights, and it was pitch black. You could not even see your own hand, and since from your face. This was kind of random, but I told my friend to say Bloody Mary 3 times. He did it, and nothing happened. So we fired up our flashlights and headed to the exit. We got out, and we couldn't find his family. So we assumed they went back inside the caves. My friends went back to the entrance, entered the cave, and walked through once again. We eventually came back to Lucifer's Corner, where my friend said Bloody Mary 3 times and noticed that there was 3 lit candles melted on the cave wall in the exact spot where my friend had said it. We looked at it, and then we looked at each other. We both bolted towards the exit. When we got outside, we were breathing heavily, trying to catch our breath. We are both trying to come up with an explanation of why candles would be there. There was nothing there. There was no candle holders, nothing that could explain why there would be candles on the cave walls. Barely any people visit these caves. What were the chances of 3 candles being the exact same spot? When my friend said Bloody Mary 3 times, there was just no way. Bruce's castle and cave on Rafflin Island is full of countless ghost stories and legends from local fishermen, hikers, and tourists. The island was a known sanctuary and hiding place for centuries until Sir Francis Drake and Sir John Norway took over the island in Castle. Those living on the island quickly surrendered, but Norway's forces slaughtered the helpless 400 civilians and 200 castle defenders, including the sick, old, and young. Today, the castle was in ruins. People have reported hearing screams and cries coming from the old site. A ghostly figure of a man in old leather armor is often seen guarding the castle perimeter before he vanishes. One spirit attempts to interact with people. She is the Brown Lady and walks the castle grounds and approaches visitors as if she is trying to speak, but she never says anything before fading away. The cave on Rafflin Island is believed to be the most haunted place in Northern Ireland. It is thought to have been bewitched long ago by the pagans who first inhabited the island. People report hearing moans and whispers coming from deep within the cave. Legend says that the Scottish king Robert the Bruce and his men hid in the cave from the English after a brutal defeat, waiting for their forces to regroup during the First War of Scottish Independence. Robert the Bruce eventually defeated the English and was recognized as the true king of Scotland. According to the local folklore, the king never died, but him and his men returned to the old cave and entered into an enchant to sleep, waiting until the day they will wake and unite the people of Scotland to defend against those who attacked Scotland. Recently, a group of fishermen settled into the cave to take a break and make tea. As they gathered and poured their cups, a hand appeared out of the darkness and placed an extra cup out to be filled. The fishermen quickly poured their mysterious guest a cup, but they were too afraid to look up to see what was lurking in the darkness, then disappeared back into the depths of the cave with this cup. Ferries regularly travel from Rathlin Island to Bell Castle, where you will find another old haunted castle overlooking the sea that has been turned into a hotel. Valley Galley Castle is over 400 years old and is haunted by three very active spirits, the most well-known as Lady Isabella Shaw and the wife of Lord James Shaw. They only wanted a son so that he would have a proper heir. When Lady Shaw finally gave birth to a son, Laura Shaw took the baby from her and locked his wife in a tiny room at the top of the castle. One report says Isabella grew restless and possibly went insane in the room until she tried to escape, only to fall to her death. Others said that Lord Shaw or someone he hired threw Isabella out of the window at the top of the castle. Now, Isabella roams the castle in search of her baby. Guests hear strange noises and witness a mysterious green mist, and sometimes smell the old vanilla scent that the lady was known to wear. She is often known to be in tiny old rooms that she was imprisoned in. Today is a fitting name of the ghost room which guests can stay in. I'm an Australian, but I live in China. I go to school here. I have recently taken a trip to Guizhou Ancient Case. These caves with the home for the banished emperor and his followers over 600 years ago. The government soon found the hiding place and sent the royal guard to capture the emperor. The soldiers finally caught up with them and massacred all the emperor's followers and soldiers, set fire to the camp, and took the emperor back to Beijing. We went to the village, which is built into the mountain. Only a few of these are open. I took about 40 pictures, and 15 contained orbs. Most were following my aunt, who is visiting. They seemed to be drawn to her. One was in the corner on the floor, like a baby would be. Another 3 were over a sacrificial table, for reasons need not explanation, and a very large one in the emperor's house, maybe a royal guard or the mayor of the village. These photos have been submitted to many websites. Most people believe that these pictures are the real deal. I was freaked out when I saw these pictures because I was actually in the presence of a 600-year-old person or spirit. This is an experience that I wanted to share and find out what others think. Back to the late 70s, I found myself sleeping on beaches, flop houses in the view. Like I stayed in some very weird places, including a cave. Fact is, I lived in that cave for a while. It was pretty nice as far as caves go. It wasn't huge, but big enough. The main area that I thought as my living quarters was about the size of a studio apartment. At the back, it branched off into a couple of tunnels. It didn't smell all funky and batshit or anything like that. So, I thought it was pretty safe. Gave me a place to sleep or to get out of the rain, at any rate, until something better came along. During the day, I'd walk down to the wharf and play my flute for the tourist and make a little coin. I'd usually take it to get some food or other necessity. On the way back to the cave, I'd gather firewood. As it got dark, I built myself a little campfire by the mouth of the cave, but back a ways. I sit in and have it by my dinner, and maybe read a bit and watch the flames until I felt tired enough to sleep. Overall, not a bad life. One day, I woke up to a really bad downpour. I couldn't see much past the mouth as it was raining so hard. It made me happy to be in this nice dry cave. Instead of huddling under a plastic trash bag, I stoked up the fire and was feeling pretty good. I had made a habit of bringing in a few more sticks of wood than I thought I'd use, so I could keep the fire going after a while. I still have most of a jar of peanut butter and some crackers and a paperback I hadn't read yet. Seemed to me I was pretty well set for the day. I was sitting there reading when some movement caught the corner of my eye. I turned towards the cave's opening, not knowing what to expect. Between the flickering firelight and the rain, I could barely make out the form of a man standing at the entrance. I stood up, calling out, "Hello." The guy didn't say a word. He just reached out his palm, then raised his other arm as it showed me he was unarmed. Pretty strange, but okay. I tell him to come on in before he drowns. His steps are hesitant, almost like he's scared of me, and he stooped over. I smile and invite him to sit by the fire and ask if he's hungry. Peanut butter on crackers isn't fancy, but when you're hungry, it's enough for a feast. He smiled back and shook his head no. Two things struck me at once. He was older than dirt, filthy, and he was bone dry. Bone dry when you just come out of the pouring rain. That's not right. Rain is water and water makes things wet, but this guy is dry. I start asking questions like what he's doing out in this weather, if he got lost or something. Again with the head shake no. Then I wondered if maybe he's mute or something. I didn't ask out loud, and he says no. "Sonny, I can talk, I'm just wondering about you. But I guess you mean no harm. You ain't no claim jumper, are you?" I laughed. No claim jumper here. Didn't know that this was a mine either. Is and isn't was natural when I found it. You seen these tunnels, right? I dug those, mostly by hand. Great. I just invited a lunatic to share my fire. Followed by, just an old man having me on. Followed by, "How do you know about the tunnels then? Maybe he's been here before." "Nope, not crazy, and yep, was here long before you were. Told you it's my claim." I stared in disbelief. I had not spoken one word of what I was talking about. Just then, there was the loudest clap of thunder. My head distinctively turned towards the mouth of the outside of the cave to see the lightning. I must have jumped a foot when the thunder sounded, laughing at myself. I turned back where the old man sat, but he was gone. As old as he was, he couldn't have moved that fast enough for me not to see him. And I'm sure as hell no, he didn't pass me on his way out. I'm not really sure where to begin with the story, but here goes nothing. I'm a 23-year-old girl living in a part of England known as the Black Country. It's called this as it has a large history in mining, although all these mines have been closed for a very long time. I often walk my dog, a Chihuahua, through the fields and woods near my house. The event I'm writing about happened last month, but I can still remember it as if it clearly happened. It was around midday, and it became time for me to take my dog for a walk. As we're walking through a small woods behind my house, scattered with rubbish and unwanted belongings, my dog often ventures through the bushes and trees. As she's so small, there is no problem for her, but I usually have to find another way around. As we were walking along the stream, I realized I hadn't seen her for a while, so I looked in every small place she could be. After about 10 minutes, I really start to panic, and as I can't find her, so I end up running through the stream instead of shuffling around the edges of it. When I find her, she's standing straight up, stiff with all of her fur on end, staring intently towards this dent in the thick foliage. Glancing at where she was looking, I see the glimpse of what looked like to be reflective dog eyes. Excited that she might have found a foxhole. A bit strange, I know, that I'm not an animal lover, and I've always wanted to see a fox, especially a fox cub. So I get a bit closer to get a better look, as I get closer to the parting in the thick-weaved bushes to look into the hole. I flipped a torch on my phone, on kneeling down. I noticed quickly that it's a lot bigger than I first realized. The entrance says it was just a hole into the roof of a cavernous area. This is when my dog started to whimper and pull my trousers, something she has never done before. As I turned to look at her, I heard what sounded like long nails on laminate flooring, a very rapid tapping noise. When I turn back, I am face to face with terror itself. Hanging off the ceiling like a goddamn bat is what looks like a person. But it was all wrong. It's stick. Thin, but its body and limbs are too long, and it has an additional set of arms coming out from its mid-torso, which it was using as a hand on the ceiling. But his worst features were his eyes. It had no eyelids, and his eyes were like white swirling marbles that seemed to see right through my soul. As it stared at me, it seemed like it was cocking its head like a dog when it's trying to figure something out. I was frozen and filled with fear and couldn't move. Thankfully, a sharp bite to my leg and my dog snapped back into reality. I barely remember the sprint back. All I remember is grabbing my dog and sprinting down the stream and hearing what sounded like a cross between wheels skidding and nails going down a chalkboard. I spent the rest of the night shivering, caught it up to my dog, watching cartoons to try and calm down. I have so many questions. What was that thing? Does it have anything to do with the mines that run beneath the Black Country? Does it stick to the caves, or was that a small entrance that ventured out of... My mother was coming out to visit me and my family just recently. One thing she wanted to do when she was young, but never got to do, was visit the Oregon caves. So before her coming out, I reserved a number of rooms for her and my family at the Oregon Cave Chateau. Part of the nuance of such was that the chateau is supposed to be haunted. I tried to get the room involved, 310, but it was really reserved already, darn it. Instead, I and the wife got room 301. The two kids got 302, and their mating kids bunked with mom and grandma, 24. Small room. To not much in the way of amenities, Harp matches his, but cozy and nicely house-capped. We got there just at the check-in time, and we managed to get the tour of the caves before our dinner reservation. Apparently, during the history of the caves, there was one reported death in the caves itself, an accidental suicide involving the proper use of guns, but no reported hauntings from that. But the hotel itself, room 10, is supposedly haunted by a ghost named Elizabeth. Legend has it that Elizabeth was a lady on her honeymoon who caught her newlywed husband messing around on her with a chambermaid instead of confronting her husband, who she chose suicide, either by jumping from the third-story window from her room or hanging herself within it. Now, did our room have any problems during the night? The missus didn't report any problems, though I got the notion that someone was determined to keep me from falling asleep, because every time I started to fall asleep, I get woken up by some little knit noise sound, like a creak in the room inside or outside. 4 times that happened. And when I got woken up several times despite leaving the window open to listen to the sound of a small waterfall outside the windows. One instance was one of my walking canes falling over. The kids in 302 went to sleep and stayed that way, and no problems were reported by them. But my grandma reported that in 204, she was woken up several times during the night by someone opening and closing the dresser drawers, or by someone walking around the bathroom at night, which according to the kids bunking with her, she didn't do. I'm pretty afraid. No operations, no outlines, no moaning of the ghostly kind heard or detected otherwise. The chateau was nice and the mattresses were hard, the elevation was 4,000 feet, and such caused me to gasp a bit at the night. Partly due to the head cold, and I developed due to the massive rain during the ride down. Perhaps the head call was punishment for the cruelty I visited upon a stellar J during diner. I left some butter bread in front of the dining room table, and the picture window which Jay put on the performance, trying to fly through the window to get at. If you go to the chateau, be sure to drive slow. The last 5 miles of the road is very twisty and turny, and there are plenty of critters to avoid making roadkill. And bring a jacket, it gets chilly in the caves. This is just a short story of something that happened last weekend when Rob, my husband, and I went to Hocking Hill State Park in southeast Ohio. We decided, translate to Rob decided, to go to Hocking Hills for the day last Saturday, September 22nd, and do some hiking inside. Seeing I haven't been hiking him forever, so I was reluctant to go. That and I just simply didn't want to. As we were parked, we noticed that several people had gathered to take pictures on the stone bridge that leads down to the path that takes you to Old Man's Cave. As we were waiting for them to move, we were talking about the history of the place. I have lived in Ohio for 18 years, and I've never been there. So Rob was telling me different things that he would see and where to be careful. The crowd finally moved, and we made our way down the steps, leading to this beautiful rock formation. I was watching the sun glint off the water, instead of where I should have been walking, and was getting a little too close to the edge. I heard Rob, or what I thought was Rob, say, "Be very careful, dearie. It's a little tittle-top from here." I started laughing and turned to ask Rob where he had heard such an old-fashioned word like tittle. And since when did he call me dearie? When I turned around, I realized he was still up at the top, photographing the bridge, and I was midway from the bottom all alone. I thought maybe it was an echo from the conversation someone else was having close by, as the place echoed a bit when you spoke loudly. Rob finally made his way down, and I was telling about what I heard. He looked at me and asked if it was a voice of a man or a woman, and started to laugh when I said it was a man's voice. I was a little mad when he laughed, as he knows how things go with me, and he has never laughed at me before. After glaring at him and sticking out my tongue, he proceeded to tell me that, when he was younger, he used to go fishing a lot with his grandpa. His grandpa would tell Rob's grandma he was taken to the little man fishing, and Robber tell his parents that he was going fishing with the old man. They were set up by the lake behind their house in Indiana and fish for hours. When Robber get excited about hooking a fish, his grandpa would always say, "Pull just a tittle, Robbie. You don't want to yank his teeth out." I haven't heard the word tittle in years, and certainly I've never used it myself. We like to think that day, since we were Old Man Cave, Rob's grandpa took the opportunity to say hi and make sure I didn't meet my demise by being a careless hiker.